The dust rose in copper clouds beneath the morning sun, settling on everything: the weathered fence posts, the rusted gate, the envelope in John Carter's calloused hands. Final notice. The words stared back at him in bold red letters, impersonal and absolute. 30 days to pay what he owed or lose everything: the ranch, the land, the legacy his grandfather had built with bleeding hands and an unbreakable spine. John stood on the porch of the farmhouse where 3 generations of Carters had been born and felt the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders like a stone. He was 42 years old and looked older. The Montana sun had carved lines into his face deep as canyons. His hands bore the scars of barbed wire and hard work, the kind of hands that knew labor but not luxury. Behind him, the house sagged slightly to the left, its paint peeling in long strips that curled in the wind. The barn leaned at an angle that defied physics, held upright more by stubbornness than structural integrity. 300 acres of high country stretched beyond the fence line, rocky, difficult land that had never been kind but had always been home. Now the bank wanted it, wanted to sell it to developers who'd carve it into parcels, build houses with names like Mountain Vista Estates and Ponderosa Heights, erasing everything his family had poured into this soil. John folded the letter and tucked it into his shirt pocket next to his heart, where it burned like a brand. He had one chance, one desperate, foolish chance: the state endurance race. $20,000 to the winner, enough to settle his debts and buy himself time. The race was legendary in these parts: 100 miles of punishing terrain through the Bitterroot Mountains, a test that separated the truly exceptional horses from the merely good. Wealthy competitors came from across the country with their expensive Arabians, their professional trainers, their veterinary teams, and sponsorships. John had none of those things. What he had was bones. The kill auction at Bridgewater had smelled of fear and manure and desperation. John had driven there 3 months ago with $57 in his wallet, money he'd scraped together selling scrap metal and a grandfather clock that had been in his family for 90 years. He told himself he was looking for a workhorse, something sturdy that could help him maintain the property, maybe pull a plow or haul supplies. But the animals at kill auctions weren't workhorses. They were the discarded, the broken, the ones nobody wanted anymore. They waited in crowded pens for the meat buyers, their eyes dull with resignation. It was a graveyard for the forgotten, a place where hope went to die. But real quick, before John spots the horse that would change his life, if you love stories about underdogs defying the odds, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the race. Now, let's see what he found in that pen. John had been ready to leave empty-handed when he saw him. Lot 47. A gelding, maybe 8 years old, standing alone in the corner of pen 12. The horse was hideous by any conventional standard, his back dipped in the middle like a hammock, his legs bent at angles that looked wrong, his coat a mottled brown that suggested no particular breeding. His ribs showed through his sides. His mane was matted with burrs. But his eyes. When that horse looked at John through the metal bars, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. The horse didn't have the dead stare of an animal that had given up. His eyes held a spark, a fierce intelligence that said he wasn't done yet, wasn't ready to surrender to whatever fate the world had planned for him. That one, John had told the auctioneer. The man had laughed. That bag of bones? He's lame, friend. Look at those legs. Won't last you a month. How much? Meat buyer will give me 60 for the lot. You can have him for 50 and I'll call it charity. John had handed over almost every dollar he had. Loading the horse into his battered trailer, John had spoken to him quietly. Don't know what you've been through, but I'm not giving up on you if you don't give up on me. Deal? The horse had simply looked at him with those fierce, knowing eyes. John had named him Bones because of his condition, and because he figured honesty was better than false hope. Now, 3 months later, Bones stood in the pasture behind John's house, grazing on sparse grass. The dip in his back remained. His legs still looked crooked to anyone who didn't know better. But he'd gained weight. His coat had a shine to it. And when John approached the fence, Bones lifted his head and walked over with a fluid grace that seemed to contradict his awkward appearance. John climbed through the fence and placed his hand on Bones's neck. We're going to do something crazy, he said quietly. Something everyone's going to say is impossible. but I've seen you run when you think nobody's watching. I've seen how you move across that rocky hillside like it's flat ground. I think you've got something special in you that nobody else can see." Bones turned his head, one dark eye fixing on John's face. "The state endurance race is in 2 weeks. Prize is $20,000. That's enough to save this place, but the entry fee is $500, money I don't have." John paused. "I sold the truck this morning, got $550 for it. That's enough to enter and have $50 left for supplies." He pulled the entry form from his back pocket, already filled out in his careful handwriting. "Everyone's gonna laugh at us. Everyone's gonna say we can't do it. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm a damn fool for even trying." John's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "But I'd rather be a fool who tried than a coward who gave up without a fight." Bones stood perfectly still, listening with an intensity that seemed almost human. "So, what do you say? You willing to run one more race before the world writes us both off?" The horse's answer came in the form of a soft nicker, and somehow, in that sound, John heard agreement. The registration office at Hammond Ridge Fairgrounds buzzed with activity. John stood in line clutching his entry form, painfully aware of how out of place he looked. Around him, professional trainers in crisp polo shirts discussed strategy. Wealthy owners compared pedigrees and training regimens. Everyone looked polished, prepared, confident. John's boots had holes in them. His shirt had been mended twice. He smelled like honest sweat because he'd walked the 8 miles into town, unable to afford the gas after selling his truck. When he reached the desk, the clerk barely glanced at him before taking his form. "Horse's name? Bones." She looked up then, one eyebrow raised. "Bones?" "Yes, ma'am." "Breed?" "Unknown." "Training pedigree?" "None." The clerk's expression shifted from mild interest to poorly concealed amusement. "Sir, are you sure you understand what this race entails? 100 miles of extremely difficult terrain. Horses need to be conditioned? I understand. The entry fee is non-refundable." "I understand that too." She shrugged and processed his paperwork, taking his $500 and handing him a race number. "You're number 73. Horse inspection is tomorrow at dawn. If your animal doesn't pass the vet check, you're disqualified. No refunds." John took the number and left, feeling the stares following him out the door. In the parking lot, a cluster of trainers stood near an expensive horse trailer, smoking cigars and laughing. One of them, a red-faced man in a $1,000 hat, noticed John and called out, "Hey, you the guy who registered that glue factory horse?" John kept walking. "We got a pool going on how far you make it. Most of us say you don't make the first checkpoint. What do you think?" John stopped, turned, looked the man in the eye. "I think you should save your money for entry fees instead of betting it on other people's failures." The man's grin faltered. His companions laughed, but the sound had an edge to it. John walked away before things could escalate. The evening before the race, John sat on his porch watching the sun sink behind the mountains. Bones grazed in the pasture, silhouetted against the orange sky. The foreclosure letter remained in John's pocket, a constant reminder of what was at stake. He thought about his grandfather, who'd first claimed this land back in 1947. Thought about his father, who'd expanded it, made it productive, taught John that hard work and integrity mattered more than wealth. Thought about all the years of struggle, all the small victories and crushing defeats that made up a life. Tomorrow would determine whether that legacy continued or ended. John rose, walked to the pasture fence. Bones came over immediately, pushing his head against John's chest in a gesture of affection. "Tomorrow's our day," John said quietly. "Win or lose, we'll give them something to remember." The horse's breath was warm against his skin. That night, John didn't sleep much. He lay in bed listening to the wind, going over the race route in his mind, calculating water stops and elevation changes, and how to pace a horse that everyone believed would fail. Dawn came cold and clear. The pre-race veterinary inspection took place in a field turned chaotic with horses, handlers, and officials. John led Bones through the crowd, acutely aware of the stares and whispered comments that followed them. The vet assigned to their station was an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He ran them over Bones's legs, checking for soundness, examining his teeth, listening to his heart. "These legs," the vet murmured, "they're unusual. Not lame exactly, but the angles are unconventional." "He moves fine," John said. "Better than fine, actually." The vet straightened, made notes on his clipboard. Heart rate and respiration are excellent. Hydration good. No obvious lameness despite the structural oddities. He stamped the form. He's cleared to race. Though I'll be honest, I've never seen a horse built quite like this. Keep an eye on him during the race. Those legs might not hold up under sustained stress. They'll hold. The vet studied John for a moment. You really think you can compete against these horses? He gestured toward the nearby paddocks where sleek, expensive Arabians stood like sculptures, their handlers fussing over every detail. I think we'll find out. At the starting line, 73 horses and riders assembled. John and Bones were positioned near the back by virtue of their late registration. The favorites, glossy Arabians with professional riders, occupied the prime starting positions. John recognized several horses from racing magazines, animals worth more than his entire ranch. A bookmaker circulated through the crowd, shouting odds. Midnight Prince, 3-1, Desert Storm, 5-1, number 73. He paused, consulting his sheet, then broke into laughter. 500-1 against Bones. Any takers? Several people placed bets, treating it as a joke, a novelty. John ignored them, focused on the starting official, on the course ahead, on the rhythm of Bones's breathing beneath him. The starting gun fired. The field exploded forward in a thunder of hooves. Expensive horses surged ahead, their riders jockeying for position. John held Bones back, letting the chaos resolve itself, finding space on the outside where they could run their own race without getting boxed in or knocked around. Within the first mile, they were dead last. The early course wound through relatively flat terrain, grassland and scattered pine. Easy going meant to let horses warm up before the real difficulty began. The front runners pushed hard, establishing dominance, their riders confident in their animals' superior breeding and conditioning. John maintained a steady pace, feeling Bones's movement beneath him, smooth and unhurried. The horse's breathing remained even. His stride showed no signs of stress. At the 5-mile checkpoint, officials logged their time. A steward shook his head as they passed. You're 20 minutes behind the pack. You'll never catch them. John didn't respond, didn't need to. Bones knew what to do. The course climbed into the foothills, the terrain growing rockier, steeper. The pack began to string out as weaker horses fell behind. John heard radio chatter from the course marshals. 3 horses had already withdrawn, unable to handle the elevation change. Bones climbed steadily, his crooked legs finding purchase on rocky ground that made other horses stumble. His breathing remained controlled. His pace didn't slow. At the 20-mile mark, John could see the main pack ahead. Maybe 30 horses still bunched together, their riders pushing for position. By mile 30, the heat had risen significantly. The sun hammered down from a cloudless sky. Several more horses withdrew, overcome by heat and exertion. Bones didn't slow. If anything, he seemed to be warming up, his stride lengthening, his breathing settling into a deep, powerful rhythm. Mile 40 brought the first major climb, a brutal ascent up a rocky trail barely wide enough for one horse. The pack fragmented here, horses struggling up the incline, their handlers walking them to spare their strength. Bones climbed like he'd been born to it. His odd leg angles, which everyone had mocked, proved perfectly suited to navigating steep, uneven terrain. He moved with a floating grace that seemed to defy physics, each step placed with precision, his weight distributed in ways that conserved energy. They passed their first competitor at mile 42, then another at 45, then 3 more in quick succession. At the 50-mile checkpoint, the halfway point, John let Bones drink and checked his condition. The horse showed minimal fatigue. His heart rate recovered quickly. His eyes remained bright and alert. The veterinary official monitoring the checkpoint looked puzzled. His vitals are better than they were at the start. That shouldn't be possible after 50 miles. He's just getting warmed up, John said quietly. The second half of the course grew progressively more brutal. The trail wound through high mountain passes, across scree fields where one wrong step could mean a broken leg, through forests so dense the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Horses that had started strong began to falter. John passed the favorites one by one. Midnight Prince at mile 60, struggling with the altitude. Desert Storm at mile 70, his rider walking him down a steep descent to spare his legs. By mile 80, only a dozen horses remained in contention. By mile 90, John and Bones were in third place. The front-runners, two expensive Arabians ridden by professional endurance, racers, maintained a slight lead, but John could see they were pushing their horses hard, asking for every bit of speed and stamina. Bones, by contrast, seemed to be simply running. His breathing remained steady. His stride showed no signs of shortened or labored movement. He navigated the treacherous terrain with an almost supernatural awareness, choosing paths that conserved energy, avoiding loose rocks and unstable ground. At mile 95, they caught the second-place horse. The rider glanced over, eyes widening in disbelief, as the horse they'd all dismissed as a joke pulled even and then ahead. The final 5 miles descended from the high country back toward Hammond Ridge. The trail switched back and forth down a steep mountainside, requiring careful navigation and iron control. The lead horse, a magnificent gray Arabian worth $100,000, was struggling. John could see foam at the bit, hear labored breathing, recognize the signs of a horse nearing the end of its endurance. At mile 98, on a particularly tight switchback, the Arabian stumbled. Not badly, just a moment of lost balance, but enough that his rider had to slow, had to regain composure. Bones didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. He flowed down the trail like water, his movements fluid and precise. They passed the Arabian, took the lead, and with 2 miles remaining, John leaned forward in the saddle and whispered, "Go." Bones surged forward with energy that seemed impossible after 98 miles of brutal racing. His stride lengthened, his breathing deepened but remained controlled. He ran like a horse just starting his day instead of finishing an endurance race that had broken better animals. They crossed the finish line 3 minutes ahead of the second-place finisher. The crowd stood in stunned silence. John dismounted slowly, his legs stiff from hours in the saddle. Bones stood beside him, sides heaving slightly but otherwise showing remarkable composure. The horse's eyes remained bright. His head was up. He looked around at the crowd with alert curiosity. The silence broke as officials rushed forward. The head race official, a stern woman named Margaret Ross, approached with a clipboard and an expression of deep suspicion. "We need to hold your horse for testing." Testing for what? Performance-enhancing drugs, illegal stimulants, something. Her voice carried absolute certainty that John had cheated somehow. No horse with his condition and breeding can run that fast for that long without chemical assistance. It's physically impossible. John felt anger rise in his throat but swallowed it down. "Test him. You won't find anything." 2 veterinary officials took Bones away while John was escorted to a holding area. The second and third place finishers came in, their expensive horses exhausted and lathered, their riders accepting congratulations that felt hollow given the controversy surrounding the finish. John sat on a metal bench outside the veterinary barn, listening to the murmur of the crowd, the whispered accusations. He'd gone from anonymous to suspicious without ever being respected. An hour passed, then 2. The sun had started its descent when the barn door finally opened. Dr. Richard Hayes, the chief veterinarian for the State Endurance Commission, emerged. He was an older man with 30 years of experience, someone who'd examined thousands of competition horses. His face was pale. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. He walked to the officials' podium, where Margaret Ross waited with the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Hayes' voice carried across the suddenly silent crowd, "I need everyone's attention, please." The murmuring stopped. "We have completed a comprehensive examination of the horse called Bones, including blood testing, physical examination, and advanced imaging. I can state with absolute certainty that this animal has no illegal substances in his system. He is not on performance-enhancing drugs." A ripple of confused conversation spread through the crowd. "However," Dr. Hayes continued, his voice taking on a strange, wondering quality, "our examination revealed something extraordinary, something I have never encountered in my career." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "This horse has a heart approximately 3 times the size of a normal equine heart. His cardiovascular efficiency is beyond anything in the medical literature. Additionally, his blood chemistry shows a metabolic adaptation that allows him to process oxygen and energy with remarkable efficiency." The crowd was absolutely silent now. "These are not bred traits. These are not the result of training or conditioning. These are evolutionary adaptations that suggest. He trailed off, looking at his notes as if uncertain whether to continue. Suggest what? Someone called from the crowd. Dr. Hayes looked up, met John's eyes across the distance. In the 1800s, there were stories of wild mustangs in the high country, horses that could run for days without tiring, that navigated mountain terrain with supernatural ability. They were called ghost mustangs. Most historians believe they were myth, legend. He turned back to the crowd. But some of those stories describe specific physiological traits: oversized hearts, unusual leg angles adapted for mountain running, metabolic efficiency that allowed survival in harsh environments. The exact traits we're seeing in this horse. Someone in the crowd laughed nervously. You're saying that horse is part ghost? I'm saying that horse carries genetic traits thought to be extinct, if they ever existed at all. The leg angles everyone mocked as deformities, they are perfect evolutionary adaptations for ascending and descending steep terrain. The way he moves, that's not lameness, that's biomechanical efficiency refined by generations of survival in the harshest conditions. Dr. Hayes set down his notes. Gentlemen and ladies, what we're looking at is potentially the last living descendant of a bloodline everyone believed was lost to history. The silence that followed was profound. Then someone started clapping, slowly at first, then building. Within moments, the entire crowd was applauding, the sound washing over John in waves. Margaret Ross took the microphone. The result stands. John Carter and Bones are the official winners of the state endurance race. A man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd toward John. Richard Thornton, one of the wealthiest horse breeders in the country. His Arabians competed internationally. His breeding program was worth millions. Mr. Carter, Thornton extended his hand. That was the most extraordinary performance I've ever witnessed. I'd like to make you an offer. John shook the offered hand warily. What kind of offer? I want to clone your horse, preserve that genetic lineage. I'm prepared to write you a blank check. You name the price. With that DNA, we could revolutionize endurance racing, create a whole new bloodline. You'd be set for life. The horse would live forever, in a sense. John looked at Bones, who stood calmly nearby, grazing on grass as if he hadn't just made racing history. The horse lifted his head, met John's gaze with those fierce, intelligent eyes. No. Thornton blinked. I'm sorry? I said no. He's not for sale, not for cloning, not for breeding, not for anything. Mr. Carter, please be reasonable. I'm talking about potentially millions of dollars. You could save your ranch 10 times over, live comfortably for the rest of your life. At the cost of turning him into a commodity, into breeding stock kept in some fancy stable while scientists extract his DNA? John shook his head. Some things aren't for sale, Mr. Thornton. He gave me everything he had out there today, ran his heart out for me. I owe him more than treating him like a business opportunity. Thornton opened his mouth to argue, but something in John's expression stopped him. He stepped back, nodded slowly. I respect that, truly, but the offer stands if you change your mind. He walked away, leaving John standing with Bones as the crowd gradually dispersed, heading for parking lots and hotels and homes. Margaret Ross approached with an envelope. Your winnings, $20,000. Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You've earned it. John took the envelope, felt its weight in his hands. Enough to save the ranch. Enough to buy time. Enough to prove that sometimes the broken things everyone dismisses hold more value than anyone imagines. 3 weeks later, John stood on his porch watching the sun rise over the Bitterroot Mountains. The foreclosure letter was gone, replaced by a receipt from the bank showing his debt paid in full. The ranch was secure. The land would remain in the family. Bones grazed in the pasture, his crooked legs and dipped back unchanged, still looking like a horse nobody should want. But John knew better. Now, knew that beneath that ungainly exterior lived something special. A heart 3 times too large, a spirit that refused to quit, a legacy thought lost, but merely waiting for someone willing to see its value. The phone had rung 17 times in the past week. Reporters wanting interviews, breeders making offers, scientists requesting genetic samples. John had politely declined them all. Some things he'd learned were worth more than money. Some bonds ran deeper than profit. The horse who'd saved his ranch hadn't done it for reward or recognition. He'd done it because John had believed in him when no one else would. That kind of loyalty couldn't be bought or sold. could only be honored. John walked to the pasture fence. Bones ambled over, pushing his head against John's chest in familiar greeting. The horse's breath was warm in the cool morning air. "We did it," John said quietly. "Proved them all wrong. But you already knew we would, didn't you?" Bones's dark eye reflected the rising sun, and in that reflection, John saw truth. The world measured value in bloodlines and breeding, in money and credentials and conventional standards. But the truly valuable things, loyalty, heart, the will to keep going when everything said to quit, those couldn't be measured or predicted or created in laboratories. They could only be recognized by those wise enough to look past surfaces to the truth beneath. John had found that truth in a kill auction, in the eyes of a horse everyone else had dismissed as worthless. And that horse had carried him home, carried them both home, really, to a place where broken things found purpose, where the discarded proved their worth, where legends walked on crooked legs through ordinary days, waiting for someone brave enough to believe in the impossible. The sun climbed higher, painting the mountains gold, and John Carter stood with his hand on Bones's neck, knowing he was the richest man in Montana, not because of what he'd won, but because of what he'd refused to lose.